The Papers of Andrew Jackson is a UT project to collect all the surviving papers of Andrew Jackson's life and presidency, letters, memoranda, orders, speeches, everything written by him, to him, or for him, put them all in order, and then publish them in a series of volumes for everyone to see. Lots of people use these volumes. Pulitzer Prize-winning authors John Meacham and Daniel Walker Howe have quoted us extensively and thanked us profusely. So did PBS in the primetime documentary Andrew Jackson, Good, Evil, and the Presidency, now enjoying a second life in classrooms. Our volumes are quoted and consulted nearly every day by historians, biographers, reporters, columnists, speechwriters, and filmmakers. The new hit musical of last year's Broadway season, Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, drew directly on our work. In our hands, history is definitely sexy pants. Don't laugh, I don't have time for it. Assembling Andrew Jackson's papers is like working a giant jigsaw. Here are some torn scraps in Jackson's handwriting, once owned by Malcolm Forbes, the fabulously wealthy collector of historical manuscripts, Fabergé eggs, and Elizabeth Taylor. We match these with other scraps at the Hermitage in Nashville, came up with a perfectly connected letter, not one word missing, that Jackson wrote to his wife, Rachel, in 1824. Sometimes a historical gold nugget can be hidden in plain sight. This is the first page of a 6-page narrative that Jackson wrote. It's in the Library of Congress in Washington, mixed in with about 100,000 other pages of Jackson manuscripts. It's got no date, nothing to show when it was written or why. Sometime in the year 1826 it begins. We discovered it's the draft of an editorial column in the Washington Globe, the newspaper voice of Jackson's administration. We can now tell when he wrote it precisely within 48 hours. And beyond its interesting content, we learned something that no one had known before, namely that Jackson, while president, was writing for the newspapers. Jackson had a famously volatile temper and also a colorful vocabulary. In 1803, when he was a Tennessee militia general, he challenged Governor John Sevier to a duel for his gasconading conduct in the streets of Knoxville, just a few yards from here. Gasconading is a fine word which Jackson characteristically misspelled. Jackson was not a good speller. He had trouble with words like the, but he was a fair one. He practiced what you might call compensatory misspelling. If he gave his Secretary of State, Mr. Edward Livingston, a second G by mistake the first time he wrote his name, then he was careful to balance the account by leaving that second G out and also the first one the very next time. We expose forgeries at the Jackson Papers, and we catch thieves. A prime Jackson letter stolen from an archive can go for $10,000, but when they try to sell the stuff, we nab them. Here's a story from the New York Post about how a keen-eyed researcher, Tom Cohens of our staff, who was in the audience, spotted a letter that had been stolen from the New York State Library. We also solve mysteries. In 1835, somebody calling himself Junius Brutus Booth threatened Jackson with assassination. Booth was a famous actor and the father of John Wilkes Booth, who later killed Abraham Lincoln. He was also a notoriously crazy and out-of-control guy, kind of a mashup of Lindsay Lohan and Darth Vader. And for that reason, scholars had always assumed that someone else wrote the letter and signed Booth's name as an alias. We proved that Booth really did write it. We matched handwriting with his other letters, ran down where he was the day the letter was written, but the real clincher was a letter we found to a New Orleans theater owner, which you see here, where Booth apologized for what he called his insane behavior in writing insolent letters to the country's leaders, in particular to Jackson. This one got us on to national news and also on to PBS's History Detectives. Here I am on the show in our offices presenting the proof to host Tukufu Zuberi. You can watch the whole show online. It's season 7, episode 3. In Jackson's day, the president signed every government land deed in person. Once I got a call from a realtor in Michigan preparing to sell a property. The title search had turned up a deed signed by Jackson, and she thought maybe he had once owned it himself. I had to disappoint her. Then she told me this is the property she was trying to sell. It's the Pontiac Silverdome, where the Detroit Lions used to play. One day I got an email also from a school kid named Kendall. I replied politely, I always do, but also cautiously, since I don't want to be flooded with questions from 8th graders. Instead, I got an email from Kendall's mom thanking me for my time. She said she knew how busy I must be, since she herself got lots of emails from folks wanting to know how to get into the Olympics. That one threw me. I'm not much on popular culture, so the mom's name, Kris Kardashian Jenner, didn't mean anything to me. But friends tipped me off who she was and who little 8th grader Kendall also was. This is Kendall as she looked at the time in her publicity photo as spokesmodel for Nordstrom. We don't let this kind of fun distract from our real work of publishing documents that scholars will use to understand Andrew Jackson and his times. Our next volume covers 1831, a very lurid year in Jackson's presidency. Here he asks 4 high government officers whether they had indeed tried to assassinate the Secretary of the Treasury in the streets of Washington. And the next one is Andrew Jackson, assuring the Indians that he, their great father, does not speak with forked tongue. You thought that came from a B movie. And that he wishes them to remove to a rich land beyond the Mississippi where they can live, they and their children, as long as the grass grows or the water runs in peace and plenty. The land will be theirs forever. And the next one is him in 1830 in his private memorandum book, already composing his most famous presidential message, his 1832 veto of the Bank of the United States, in which he famously said, "It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the axe of government to their selfish purposes." And lastly, as promised, in just a second, here is Jackson complaining on Christmas Day, 1830, that his family had been, as he put it, overreached by the secret workings of the great political magician who works in darkness, is plausible but cunning, and as deceitful as Satan. The great magician was Jackson's vice president, John C. Calhoun, who Jackson blamed for duping his nephew and niece into taking sides against Jackson in the Eaton affair, a sex scandal surrounding the Secretary of War that nearly wrecked Jackson's administration. If you want to know more, check out our most recent volume, seen here, and our next one covering the year 1831, which will be out next year. Thank you very much.